Hello and welcome to Talking Meds, a podcast from PrescQIPP, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. I'm your host, Jonathan Underhill, Medicines Clinical Advisor here at PrescQIPP. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Talking Meds for 2026. Hope you had a fab festive break and are raring to go to meet the challenges of whatever 2026 has to bring for us. As part of preparing for 2026, what we thought we would do for this episode of Talking Meds is speak to three of our previous guests and ask them what they think the world holds for us in terms of medicines and prescribing in 2026. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Philip Newland-Jones. Philip is a consultant pharmacist in diabetes and endocrinology at Southampton. Philip joined us back in April 25 in episode 16, where we discussed the management of obesity. So welcome, Phil. I'm also joined by Mina E. Mina joined us for episode 18 back in May 25. And you'll remember Mina is an acute medicine hospital pharmacist based in the Northeast. And we discussed sustainability challenges in medicines back then. And last but by certainly no means least, I'm delighted to be joined again by Dr. Lucy Pollock. So Lucy and I did a series on which we called Sensible Prescribing in Older People with Jonathan and Lucy back in January, February 2025. So you'll remember Lucy is a consultant in the care of older people and a geriatrician in Somerset. And she's also an acclaimed author. And if you've not purchased and read her books yet, then you should certainly do that. And if you didn't get them, if you got a book token for Christmas, I can think of nothing better than to buy Lucy's book. So welcome, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to let listeners into a little bit of a secret here, but it's a bit like Jools Holland's Hootenanny, this, isn't it? Because Jools Holland's Hootenanny, which goes out on New Year's Eve, is actually recorded in about December time. So we have pre-recorded this, but we're going to project ourselves as if we're in January 2026. So starting with you, Lucy, what's been going on with you since we last spoke in February 25 then?
Oh, Johnny, thank you so much for having me, and it's a real pleasure to be here. This has been a busy year, and I am really glad because polypharmacy in frail older people has really taken hold of the public imagination and the medical establishment as well. And I think we're gearing up for some really big changes. So personally, I've been doing some more work with the Royal College of Physicians, launching their managing multiple medication toolkit. I've done some work with the Royal College of GPs, did a lovely masterclass with Tessa Lewis at their annual conference. But the thing that is best of all, absolutely fanfare drum roll, is the British Geriatric Society's new publication, one-page pragmatic prescribing to reduce harm in older people with moderate to severe frailty. That dropped earlier on this month, and it is fantastic. It's really clear. It's got backing. It's endorsed by NICE. Thank you so much. It also has backing from the RPS and from the Royal College of GPs and the Royal College of Physicians. And I think I can say this without causing too much controversy. It has already attracted a statement from the British Society for Heart Failure saying that it's wrong. So that's fantastic. Let's bring on a respectful conversation and a debate about where we are. So really exciting stuff.
Great stuff, Lucy. Yes, I read that. I think that came out in November 25. I read it. And again, I'm probably biased here because I think we have a lot of our values in terms of person-centered care and evidence-informed decision-making are fairly aligned, but I thought it was a brilliant paper. We'll put a link in the show notes to it, and if you haven't read it yet, listeners, then put that on your list of things to do first in 2026, because it's fantastic. I'm going to be slightly controversial here, and if you're getting a response from cardiologists on this that's maybe a little bit robust, then you're probably saying something that needs to be said about frailty and person-centered care, because I'm not sure we always get it right. Both ways. Sometimes there's under-prescribing and sometimes there's over-enthusiastic over-prescribing, and it's all about that balance, isn't it?
Exactly that. And that's why we need the debate. It's great.
Brilliant, thank you. So Phil, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Yeah, so lots of education. Anyone will sit down long enough, I'll talk to them about diabetes, endocrinology, or obesity, basically. But outside of that, I've been doing a little bit of work with Levemir shortages. So we've had to write the national guidance to try and support primary care to help convert about 97,000 people over from Levemir to an alternative insulin with type 1 diabetes. So that's taken up a chunk of time. And then outside of that, we've been working with Department of Health and a lot of the specialist societies for our first disease modifying therapy for type 1 diabetes. So essentially to treat those with early stage type 1 diabetes kind of before they get overtly hypoglycemic. And so we're actually waiting a nice technology appraisal for that this week. But there's a lot of work that's gone into the background of that, and certainly the cost analysis around the impact on that person, their family, and their caregivers is it's been a really interesting thing to dig teeth into because it's not like anything else we've come across before in diabetes or endocrinology. So yeah, hopefully the first stepping stone into I guess a really interesting future for type 1 diabetes and the potential to either stop it in its tracks or cure it in those with a known risk of developing it.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And again, a massive challenge for the service and NICE in particular. How do you do a health technology assessment of something that fixes a disease and stops somebody having the requirements that we've all been used to for something like type 1 diabetes? If you can stop that requirement for insulin, then how do you do an economic model that reflects that? It's a real challenge for people there because I suspect that requires an investment up front in a technology for some payback further down the line. And it's really, really difficult to get your head around that sort of stuff, isn't it?
Incredibly so. And I think, it's not particularly cheap intervention because of the low numbers of people that are going to be treated with it. But, the impact of delaying someone's onset of type 1 at this stage by 3 years, if that's a 2-year-old developing type 1 diabetes at 5 years old instead, dramatic difference to that family and that upbringing reality. The same as if it pushes past someone from, I don't know, the time of their exams to past school years. It's how do you put a cost on those years? It's really
Yeah,
difficult.
absolutely. And it's one of those things where I always used to say when I worked at NICE, if NICE didn't exist, you'd want to have an organization invented to make these really, really difficult decisions for people because you can't do it as a clinician, you can't do it as a member of the public, you can't do it as a parent because we're all biased and we all have our own biases at play here. What NICE does really well is try and take as much of those biases out of it and come to a fair decision. And I don't envy the guys at NICE having to make that decision. Actually, it's really tricky, but will be really, really helpful for us and either as patients or indeed clinicians in the future. So interesting times, Phil. Interesting times. Mina, what have you been up to lately?
What have I been up to? I attended a lot of conferences of a variety of topics. So I am acute medicine by background, so very interested in learning and keeping knowledge up to date because there's so many new drugs on the horizon and coming through. And one of the things I've been having to deal with recently is the rise of private prescriptions. And how do you manage that in a hospital setting? Do you prescribe it? So patient comes in on Medicanet, midafenidate, from a privately prescribed organization through the right to choose. So I had a conversation with a mental health colleague pharmacist who said that no, we do not prescribe them because there's no verification from the provider, and obviously if it doesn't get communicated properly back into primary care, then a GP would think we've started it in hospital somewhere down the line and continue this on their repeat prescription. So I thought that was interesting and flagged it to clinical governance lead, flagged it up to medical director to try and manage a policy, a protocol of prescribing private prescriptions during inpatient stay. And a lot of risk medicine, safety, risk management that happens in my job. We have a lot of patients coming through A&E, EAU, having to do quick medicines, if you like, before they get shipped off to another ward. So that's what I've been up to.
It's an interesting one, that sort of challenge of private medicine. I've worked in hospitals previously where you have a private ward and things happen on the private ward that potentially don't happen on the NHS wards. So obviously there's that issue around the cost effectiveness of medicines gets taken out of that equation, that decision making process, doesn't it? Because the person's paying for it, or their insurer's paying for it, or whatever. However, there is still that requirement for the clinician and the person to agree this is the best course of action for you at this point in time. So if you think that something potentially is going to be harmful to the person, that doesn't mean to say they automatically can have access to that medicine. There is still that part of the decision that needs to be explained and rationalized with the person as well. So yeah, it's a real challenge, and I've heard people talk about this more and more. It appears to be becoming a greater challenge for the service to manage that sort of the interface between private healthcare and NHS provision. So yeah, again, interesting. So let's stay with you, Mina, if that's all right. What do you think the big changes for 2026 will be in medicines and prescribing?
You know what? I'm actually so excited that Philip is on a call today, recording a podcast, because I've just learned about the potential big release of the triple G. So, triple agonist peptide designed to target the three key metabolic receptors, I've been told. So, better than Manjaro, which targets GLP-1 and GIP. This one's acts on glucagon as well, and demonstrated a significant weight loss up to kind of 24% over to 48 weeks. So is NICE going to approve this? How will the ICB commission this? Will Manjaro be a day of the past, thing of the past in 2025? So I wonder if Philip wants to jump in on this.
Talk about stealing your thunder there, Phil, eh? Go for it, mate. Go on.
It's only one of the new kids in the block. No, I think it's in reality probably the most promising new agent out of the incretins coming forwards. It's probably got the most potent weight loss. But I think, as I was talking to Jonathan before, I think that we will reflect back on the drug that gives the most weight loss as being really old-fashioned in a very short length of time. And I think how you lose weight and the kind of weight that you lose in terms of where it's distributed might become more important in terms of both from a frailty sarcopenia agenda, but also just sheer muscle mass and metabolic function. I think there's, at the moment, I'm concerned about the speed at which and the amount of which weight is coming off people, and the potential for concerns and risks in the future for some of that. So yeah, I think that it's promising, along with a couple of other medicines I might touch upon as we discuss. But it's watch the space.
Lucy, I wonder if you, just in terms of your lens as a looking after older people, and the use of obesity drugs and the worry about frailty. And as Phil says, if people lose the wrong sort of weight.
Yeah. It's so important, because obviously what we're concerned is sarcopenia. So losing fat may be no bad thing, but my golly, you need every muscle you've got when you're 86. So really, but actually that also applies in younger people as well. A lot of people who are carrying a lot of weight do become very deconditioned. And because they're overweight, they can't take exercise as easily. And this isn't true of everybody that's overweight, but it's true of a proportion. You've got bad OA of your knees from carrying too much weight, and it means you're not as physically fit as you were. And then you lose a lot of weight, and some of that's muscle, and you can't afford to do that. So I am really very much interested in what's happening with encouraging people to build muscle mass at the same time as losing weight. How can we support people to do that and to sort of get back on track with building up a body that's not just got a lower BMI, but it's actually really, going to do what you want it to do as you get older. So yeah, it's fascinating.
It is. So, I mean, Phil, I don't know if you've got any comment on that. I know we've discussed about that sort of the anabolic agents being used alongside some of the weight loss.
Yes, indeed. So there's trials ongoing with sort of myostatin inhibitors alongside GLP-1 to try and preserve muscle mass whilst losing weight. I think it's worth noting that, I think the aesthetic side, and there's certainly some things that are linked directly to weight itself. So obstructive sleep apnea, osteoarthritis, some of the metabolic conditions, so MASLD, cardiovascular disease, are not necessarily linked to the weight in terms of the benefit. So, 2 weeks ago, we had the SELECT trial published, finally. It's kind of new look at the data for semaglutide about cardiovascular risk reduction in those with previous cardiac events in non-diabetes patients. Interesting enough, weight was not the determining factor as to why people had cardiovascular benefit. Those that gained 5% weight on semaglutide still had cardiovascular risk reduction compared to those that lost weight in the placebo group. So it's the medicine itself. I think that kind of shows me that it's not all weight is the same. It's actually where it's distributed. if I look back even to pioglitazone back in the day, that technically puts weight on people, yet it increases, it reduces cardiovascular risk. What it did is it moved your intra-abdominal, your liver fat to the subcutaneous fat. So you gained 2 kilos, but that 2 kilos was a good type of weight to gain. And you lost the fat that was in the organs and you reduced cardiovascular risk. So I think, weight is really heterogeneous in terms of where it's distributed. I think that the overall markers, when you kind of look at the overall percent, don't give a full story as to what we're looking at. And certainly from a cardiovascular risk, so the risk of people dying, I'm interested because it's, next year is when we get this nice TA for semaglutide in this population. And we get to judge whether or not we give it to those with a lower BMI, so 27 and above, for those that had a cardiovascular event, for just cardiovascular risk reduction, nothing to do with weight loss. The only thing in the trials that was interesting is that waist circumference was slightly linked. So if you reduce your waist circumference on the medicine or on the placebo arm, that reduced your cardiovascular risk.
So that's about the distribution of fat in your body again, Phil, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
I guess the old kind of apple and pear shapes.
Yeah. The Homer Simpson shaped body that sometimes you see in men, don't you? Yeah. So from your point of view then, Lucy, what do you think the big changes or challenges are going to be in 2026 in your particular field?
Yes, in my field. Okay. Well, listen, we talk about boomers, don't we? And we're not always being very polite when we talk about the baby boom generation. But actually, I think what we tend to forget is the baby boom began with a boom. In 1946, there was a huge excess of births compared to the year before. It was the year the war had ended and everybody just started making babies. 1947, 250,000 extra babies born in the UK on a background of about 750,000. Huge increase. And that peak did not come back down to pre-war levels until the 1970s. So those babies turn 80 next year. And we are not really ready for that. So instead of the steady increase in number of older people that is already sort of posing some challenges and really making us think about how we look after older people, instead of that continuous steady increase, we're actually going to have a great big jump. So that, I think, is going to hit the headlines in a good way. And we know that there are better ways of looking after older people. In terms of pharmacy and pharmacology and our treatment, I think what's going to be very interesting is the argument about frailty, because this isn't all about age. And I've been doing some work looking at how we measure frailty in people in trials, because you will all know that there are any number of post-hoc analyses of big cardiovascular trials saying, actually, these drugs are fine in frail older people. You don't need to worry about it. They get loads of benefit and they get no side effects. And as a geriatrician, you look at that and you think, no, that's not what I see. That cannot be right. So then you look in more detail at how they've measured frailty. What is the frailty index they've used in those trials? And the answer is there isn't one frailty index. You can make up any frailty index you like. And if you put in a whole load of cardiometabolic parameters and use those and leave out things like falls and postural hypotension and dementia and confusion, you are calling a very different population frail from the people with frailty that we see in real life. And I'm afraid, I hope, there's going to be quite a brisk debate about that. I've just written an article that's just dropped in Age and Aging last week about that, and an editorial to go with a fantastic trial study that looked at all of these frailty indices and really picked them apart, and is in the same edition. Have a look at it. It's fascinating reading.
So I guess my question back to you would be, what can we do about that then? How can we prepare as healthcare professionals for that?
Okay, so what we need is frailty attuned training for everybody. And that includes obviously pharmacists, but it also includes our, obviously doctors and social workers and people in shops, but it includes the general population, older people themselves and their families. Shifting power from the professionals to the patients and their families is a really key goal here. Being realistic, understanding the limits of medicines, empowering people to ask about their medicines, using brands, saying, what's the benefit, what's the risk, what are the alternatives, what happens if I do nothing? Really, I think we need a great big public shift about that. Also, well, we're going to come to what would I really want? So I won't answer that question yet, Johnny, because I know your last question is what one change would you make? So I'll come back to that one.
We'll wait with bated breath for that one, Lucy. But I love the phrase frailty attuned training. Not heard that before, but that's made me think straight away of if you think about everything you do with using the lens of how does this change if I'm talking about potentially somebody with frailty? For example, here's the nice guideline on heart failure. Let's use that as an example. If you then, and the recommendations are fine and sound. However, and it does say this in the heart failure guideline, doesn't it? Think about this and make sure you're considering the aspects of this if you're talking about somebody who has frailty.
Who've got multiple other conditions and they're taking lots of other medicines already. And their goals and wishes may not be what you think they are. And we have got to train ourselves to take the time to sit down and establish with that patient what's important to them, what matters, what's their relationship with their medication, and what potential harms are we producing, and be really, really careful. You know, truly, this statistic that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5 emergency medical admissions to hospital in the over 65s is due to a problem with medication. That's insane. If we said that about surgery, if we said 1 in 5 surgical admissions was because the previous surgeon had made a bit of a mess of it, you know, we just wouldn't tolerate that. And yet we've let that happen with prescribing, and we have absolutely got to sort that out.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you there. That's brilliant. What a great thing to think about for the start of 2026. Thanks, Lucy. Phil, just in terms of just to come back to you then, because obviously we've talked about some of the sort of like potential changes around obesity medicines, but anything else or anything in particular about obesity medicines that we haven't discussed yet?
I think we'll touch on access in my things I wish for this year. But I think while everyone's sitting there, I think it's, you know, we have to be frank at the moment that we have really limited access in the NHS. So at the moment, given that we've had type 2 diabetes and used GLP-1s for 15, 16 years, there's about 350,000, maybe 400,000 prescriptions a month for GLP-1s for diabetes, to put it in perspective. For obesity, 2.5 million prescriptions a month, 95% of which are private. It's phenomenal in terms of the private market in the last 2 years and how much it's gone up. The slightly scary side of that, when you start to think about it, is some of that is prescribed, you know, is given out on a PGD. It's not even prescribed by kind of people who know what they're doing or have training. It's become a little bit of the Wild West, and I think that's the concern. And it links to Mina's point about, you know, the private access and patients starting these medicines. Do they continue them in hospital, or do we even know about it? Is it recorded on GP systems? But for me, also the impact on the food industry is going to be fascinating to see. So America are a couple of years ahead of us. About 12% of the US population are on GLP-1s or incretins for weight loss, an enormous amount of the population. And they've just started to see their food industry taking the hit. Interestingly enough, it's on the fast food and the ultra-processed foods. It's not actually on the real food market. That's remained the protein, kind of high protein, real food market. It's not generally changed, but fast food down about 8%. Overall household food spending down by 8.6%. You know, it's a huge loss in the snack market where companies are now looking to reformulate, resize. Even in the UK, obviously, you've heard Heston mention about him changing his portion sizes based on the fact that he was taking it. Greggs have reduced their portion sizes and offered higher protein. You know, I think it's, you know, the hedonic effect of food of these medicines in terms of your desire to snack in between meals. It's going to completely change the food industry, probably for the better. So this is, you know, I think they're finally starting to blink in terms of they've been told for years to change what they're doing. Obviously, from the budget today, we've heard a little bit more about that, the sugar tax as well. But I think actually that's still a couple of years off. This will change the sugar content and the kind of snacking content faster than any government policy actually is just consumer spending.
Yeah, so what fascinating to think about that. And you're right, the incentives that have been put in or disincentives that have been put into the food industry haven't worked, have they? We haven't seen a large change in the sort of availability of fast foods or indeed the level of demand for fast foods. And these things are always, the change usually happens when it's consumer led. And if this is consumer led because of a behavior change that's happened in the consumer, then that's more likely to be sustainable than any incentive or disincentive that's put in place by government. So fascinating stuff. I think you're right about looking at America now and then thinking about maybe in a year's time in the UK or 2 years' time in the UK, Is that what we're going to see here? And I suspect you're right. I've already seen labeling on food that says something along the lines of if you're taking an obesity medicine, then this is more suitable for you as a in terms of it'll still be tasty for you and it won't upset your tummy. So
Yeah,
you're seeing that already, aren't you?
the slightly, the sort of bigger risk to this, and it might bring us beautifully on to, is that these injections, the amount of kind of wasted plastics that go into these, despite all the recycling schemes, is phenomenal. You think of the increase in prescribing in the last 2 years of plastics for this purpose. Most of the insulin companies have either closed down some of their insulin production lines in preference for GLP-1 lines in these reusable pens. So we've had discontinuation of multiple insulin products used by those with type 1 diabetes to enable those lines to be used for commercial purposes because they make much more money from the GLP-1s using those manufacturing lines. And so I think there will come a point where actually, next year also, 2026 is the year we start to get the GLP-1s. So these are the first kind of oral GLP-1 receptor agonists that are not anywhere near as potent, but for weight maintenance, in terms of mass production, in terms of certainly sustainability and for the environment, they've got to be better than these non-reusable plastics that we're using in these once weekly injections at the moment.
Yeah, and most people prefer to take an oral tablet than to have a once weekly injection as well. Most people. There are still some people who prefer just once a week, but for most people, and I think you're right, that potentially could be a big change. So just moving on to the question that you've all anticipated. So what if you could wish for one thing to change in 2026, what would it be and why? So Mina, can I ask you that? If there was one thing that you'd want to see changed?
Do you know what? I actually will welcome fewer changes for 2026, please. So that might sound really unprogressive, but I feel like clinicians have had relentless upheaval since COVID. We've had the elections, the strikes, the NHS restructures, the second NHS restructure, and the abolishment of organizations, the mergers, the new models of care, the neighborhood health proposal. Come on, we're all exhausted. I just want one less change. We've gone into system paralysis for a few years now, unless you're led by a group of motivators or cheerleader type personalities. Most staff, I suspect, just want a period of stability that would allow us to all consolidate and deliver better care. But on a serious note, so I think I'm excited of the rollout of more digital services available. So I work for 111 as well. And one of the bugbear of mine is when I go on EPS tracker, I can't see what drugs has been dispensed or prescribed by the GP, first of all, and what drugs have actually been dispensed from a pharmacy currently appears as a random bunch of codes. So there's a trial currently. I've spoken to someone within NHS Digital that says that we'll potentially could see the EPS tracker that rolls out with the drug that they dispense and prescribe, with the quantity stated of how much they prescribe as well, which will save me so much hassle when I answer my 111 calls. Um, and another thing I would like to see is a better workforce plan for pharmacy that enable pharmacy staff to pursue both clinical and leadership careers. So I've spoken to so many people about this. So someone said, why can't you be a consultant pharmacist as well as chief pharmacist? I mean, why can't you? We have medical consultants who've been doing that for years. They have SPA time built up for, your managerial stuff and your governance stuff. And then the rest of the time they're practicing on a ward and doing clinics and outpatient. But for pharmacy, somehow, you have this predominantly 9 to 5 managerial office-based roles that currently define the upward progression in pharmacy. So hopefully, with the new Royal College of Pharmacy, we have more pathways for people to kind of credential as a clinical patient-facing role. But one argues where the money is going to come from for these roles. We're all fighting for the same pot of money across specialties. But yet we're asking our staff to do more for less, become DPPs, do more research. I don't want to head down that path personally until I can see a promised reward or a pathway for all the efforts I'm putting in.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the CPC North in November, and there was lots of conversations about first of all, why should I join the new College of Pharmacy, and then what about that consultant pathway? Why would I bother doing that if there's not going to be necessarily an obvious career pathway for me? as a pharmacist. And I think that is something that people are going to have to address, and the leadership of the professions are going to have to address. I suspect this is the case in medicine as well. I think we think pharmacy's different to medicine, but again, I speak to a lot of medical colleagues who are sort of struggling with where do I want to go and how am I going to get there and what happens when I do get there. So no, I think that's really interesting, Mina. Phil, just in terms of your sort of, if you could wish for one thing, not three things, Mina, one thing to change for 2026, what would it be and why?
I'd like to try and start embedding the evidence base we've already got. So, for example, because it's such a hot topic, it'll be down to the obesity stuff again. I think that at the moment we've widened the gap between those that can and can't. Social deprivation is the biggest determinant of whether or not you're likely to be overweight. And at the moment, we've only got people that can afford to buy the medicine, getting access to it, with very few prescribing for patients to prevent ill health in the first place. So we're giving it to people in the first 5 years who essentially already have complications. The 10-year plan is about prevention of complications. The people who get to prevent those complications don't get access to the medicines until year 11 and 12 on that rollout scheme, which seems at odds with the 10-year plan. So it is very difficult to kind of embed that in practice. And I think that comes down to also the glue that's between all of the clinicians and people at the moment. So because of all the issues and aspects we had in terms of the uncertainty about the structure of the NHS over the next 12 months, the people that have been labelled as bureaucrats and all the rest of it, that actually the glue that sticks all the healthcare professionals together and facilitates those things to happen, like the ICB or people within management structures, have essentially either been made redundant or put on hold or don't know whether the job's going to be there. And that has made everything so much harder just to get your day-to-day job done. So I think it's, one thing to change is recognise the importance of actually the glue that sticks the clinicians together. And having less of them is not going to be a good thing for the future. I wish we had more, actually.
Yeah, again, a really interesting point. That sort of inverse care law thing is I'm really seeing the obesity medicine sort of like really shining a light on that. And I think you're right as well. We have to be really, really careful. I've been around, and I worked it out in my career. Seven big management of changes in the NHS, big ones, not just the little ones that happen every year, but 7 big ones. This one feels really big, and every time we need to get rid of that layer of management bureaucracy, and that's just a misconception, because any large organisation needs management and managers to do the job, to enable clinicians to be able to deliver the care in the most efficient way. And if you get rid of all that, then what happens? You end up just either not doing it properly, or you end up with duplication everywhere. And you end up with that failure demand where you don't do things right in the first place, and you end up cocking it up for somebody else along the line, which ends up costing more. So, hopefully there'll be some clarity in 2026 on that, but I'd certainly want to change that and just let's just get on with it, and then we can get on with things, can't we? Lucy, come on, be positive. What?
Oh, 2026. Okay. In 2026, the regulators, the GMC, the General Pharmaceutical, the Royal College of GP, all of them are going to agree that training in the management of polypharmacy and practical, pragmatic, realistic prescribing is going to be mandated training for all people who prescribe. That would be my my magic wand. I think it's essential. I think we need really good embedded training, and then we need to have time to deliver it. And I am going to have a rider. I'm only going to have 2. The other one I really want, Johnny, is, the BNF gives you the dose, the indication, the side effects. It tells you how to start the medicine. It doesn't tell you how to stop it. I wish that the BNF contained a little paragraph for every medicine explaining, how do I stop this stuff?
Okay, I am laughing to myself a little bit here because I'm too humble to say this, but when I was at NICE,
say it, Jonathan.
When I was at NICE and I was in helping manage the contract for the provision of the BNF to the NHS, I kind of suggested this to them about 8 years ago, and actually, and I don't mean I suggested it, it was in the National Overprescribing Review.
Yes, in Keith Ridge's fabulous review. There it was. Yeah.
Exactly. And there was a challenge for NICE in there, and there was a challenge for the BNF in there about, yes, can we just help people safely stop medicines or consider stopping medicines in there? That would be, again, that would be brilliant if the BNF could do that. And including, I don't know, brand recommendations, benefit risks, alternatives, and no treatment in every single monogram. Wouldn't that be lovely as well? The other thing about the mandatory training for polypharmacy, again, I love that. I can hear Claire Howard listening to this and having a little chuckle to herself about the National Polypharmacy Programme and whether or not that could, but the idea of making that mandatory training, and I've had conversations with people like Alf Collins about this, about shared decision making, and if we had that as part of mandatory training as well, then I do think that would help. And
we should not be teaching anybody how to prescribe without teaching them how to prescribe really safely in complex older people, because that is the big population, and it's going to get bigger. We have got to pivot our training to recognise that, and hats off to Claire for that incredible programme. But something, that or something like it needs to be embedded right the way through.
Completely agree. So yeah, thank you all so much for your reflections on the air, but also importantly thinking about your what do you think's the challenges coming up are, and then your 3 things. I really like them. So Mina, with let's just consolidate here. There's been so much change. Let's just keep calm and try and get on with things. Something around digital technology and being able to track prescribing of medicines better. Absolutely. And a workforce plan, a coherent workforce plan that's encouraging and enabling for the professions. Absolutely. That sort of inverse care law that Phil talked about, embedding the evidence base that's there already, opening access perhaps to obesity medicines for those who potentially are going to benefit much more from it than what we're seeing at the moment. Completely agree with that. And then Lucy's plea for that mandatory training aspects of polypharmacy and shared decision making, and one for my friends at the BNF. Let's put something in there about how do you safely stop medicines as well. There's the challenge for you all, listeners. So thank you so much to Lucy. Thank you so much to Phil. Thank you so much for Mina. Thank you all for listening, and have a fantastic 2026. Cheers, guys.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Have a happy 2026.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next episode of Talking Meds from PrescQIPP, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky to join in with the discussions, and email us on talkingmeds@prescript.info with your feedback or suggestions for future topics or guests. Please don't forget to register for access to the PrescQIPP website for all of our excellent resources.